Welcome. Today we're exploring how to set up a secure environment with the Bacalhau network. We'll run native Python jobs, process data on remote nodes, and keep everything locked down with full auditing. Let's jump right in. I should note that, of course, you can pause the screen at any point and read our code, but all the content that you see here is in GitHub repository, linked below, where you can follow along. Okay, so first, here's our Bacalhau cluster. You have one requester node, think of it as the coordinator, and two compute nodes that do all the heavy lifting. You can have as many nodes as you want, either requester or compute nodes, based on the topology and requirements of your environment. They'll stay in sync automatically, and everything is taken care of for you. It's designed to be flexible, secure, and scalable, even across zones, cross regions, and cross clouds. So let's start with a quick hello world. We'll start with a Docker-based job using Ubuntu. Now, Bacalhau supports WebAssembly or just about any executable you like running on your system, but we'll start with Docker because it's familiar for folks, especially those who are coming over from Kubernetes. So, as we type this out, Bacalhau Docker run Ubuntu, that's the name of the image, echo, and then we'll do hello shared cluster. We send that off to run, and then we grab the description, and we notice that it took just about 6 seconds to run, be provisioned to a node in the network, start the job, and then finish the job. And at the end of it, it says, hello, shared cluster, which is exactly what we intended. All right, we're off to a good start. Let's keep going. Next, we're going to run with a little bit more advanced job. And to do that, we'll first create a file that describes our entire job end to end. Most folks, when they're executing, aren't going to want to do command line interfaces only. So now let's type it out. This is a standard YAML job description. It could be either YAML or JSON. And in it, we will describe all the details of our job. So in this case, it will have the name of the image, the environment variables that we want to execute, the specifications like CPU, memory, and disk, and any other information that you would like to do as part of both the scheduling and the running of the job. Now, in order to run that job, all we have to do is, instead of typing Bacalhau run jobs, Docker run, we're now going to type Bacalhau job run, and then the description file of that job. And just like before, in just a couple seconds, it ran. And when we grab our description, you can see that the same thing happened. In this case, it took about 7 seconds to create and run the job. Find a node that had the available space, and then execute the ultimate command, which just said hello world. But in this case, instead of doing the entire job description from a command line, we did it from a reproducible job specification. Okay, moving right along. Now let's say we want to do something more complicated in our job, which may require changing the job specification each time we run it. This is where you get into something called a templated job, where instead of writing the entire job description, we're also going to be able to add on the execution the additional variables or templating that we would want to flesh out. In this case, you can see here that we have some environment variables, one of which is called command. And next to that, you see it says full text. That is something we will hand Bacalhau when we run this job, but the rest of the job description will stay the same. So now when we begin to run that job, we type out Bacalhau job run template job, and then on that command line, we give it just the environment variables that we'd like. In this case, we're going to do something even more advanced, which is instead of handing it just an environment variable, we're going to hand it a whole Python script that it'll be able to run when it gets to that node. In this case, I also base 64 encoded. I just do that just to make sure that nothing like spaces or carriage returns gets messed up when we run. Again, it happened almost instantaneously. We say Bacalhau job describe. And behind the scenes, what was going on is it was handing it a Python script which was running the entire Fibonacci sequence up to 4181. Again, this is pretty hello world stuff for Python, but when we look at the Python script, you can see that this was just an absolute generic Python script which ran through and created the Fibonacci sequence. Nothing special. It didn't know anything about running on Bacalhau. It just ran. So your data scientists and so on will be able to adopt something like Bacalhau very quickly with no additional information. Okay, moving along. Uh, one thing that you might get a little bit worried about when we talk about things like running arbitrary Python is how do you go forward and run these jobs without risking security? So let's try and exercise all the security things that Bacalhau comes with right out of the box. Here we have another Python script, which is called bad stuff. And inside bad stuff, we're going to do, like it says on the box, bad stuff. In this case, we will try and read the etc password file, which this user does not have permission for. We will try and exfiltrate some data to an external website. We will try to run a binary that this job does not have access to. We will try to open an arbitrary network socket, and we will try to delete a file from our network share. And again, the idea here is that these are common things that normally would require quite a bit of work to defend against. But with Bacalhau in its default security posture, it is able to defend against all these things on your behalf. So now when I type Bacalhau job run, and now I'm going to run my bad scripts Python file through the template variable like we had seen before, we will see at the end of this that all of the stuff was in fact denied. Reading from etc password, sending content to an external website, opening an arbitrary binary, opening an arbitrary network socket, and deleting a file all were prevented. Again, that came with no special configurations out of the box. Bacalhau just does all that stuff and lots more from a security perspective for free. And again, our end user didn't have to do anything special. That it was just completely arbitrary Python code being handed to the server to run. Okay, so we've played around quite a bit. Let's start to try and do some real work. In this particular example, I have a network share full of scientific data. This is about 1.5 TB of scientific data, far more than I would like my end users to have to upload and download just to do some initial processing. But again, we can take Bacalhau's capabilities of taking Python or again, any kind of arbitrary language that you'd like to run and move it to where the data is rather than requiring you to download it and process. So here, the first step that we're going to do is simply list all the files on that remote server. Again, that's something where typically today you would have to hand a user an arbitrary shell and give them access to that share. But in this case, we're able to restrict to just allow this user and these jobs to list files in that directory. They're going to actually list those files using Python, which you can see they've done that here. And then when they do that, they're able to get some, basic information about the size of the files, what data was uploaded, the type of files it was, and so on. And here you can see all that printed out. Some of these are, 14 gigabyte files. Again, trying to download all these things before I process it would tax many, many different computers and networks. And here I'm able to interact with that data exactly in place without it ever moving. If I wanted to process that file, which normally would take quite a while, even for a pretty significant machine, instead of me downloading it and taxing local machines to do that, I can use dedicated machines I have set up right next to those shares, which are more than powerful enough to finish it in just a few minutes. Here, I'm going to run against one of the H5 files, one of those 14 gigabyte ones you saw, do an initial scientific analysis against it to find out some of the information that's going on. Here we started the job instantly and it took a few minutes to run. But at the end of running, you can see I was able to print out a whole bunch of information and statistics about the job, about the data, excuse me, through that Python job. So again, my end users didn't have to think about, understanding a new system for running or translate to some new container or something like that. They were able to use the existing stuff that already made sense to them and just run in that container next to those nodes. And yet they were able to do some initial scientific analysis. Again, it just helps people move much more quickly. Now, before we wrap up, one thing that I also want to cover is the second half of security. The first thing of security is, of course, stopping people from doing anything, and the second part is making sure you know exactly what happened when they did try to do it. If this was a typical shell or computer, every action that you had here would probably be lost, or in the best case scenario, in somebody's history file, and there would be no central way to record everything that was going on. But because we have in Bacalhau a detailed log of everything that was going on that is immutable for the end user, here I can pick an arbitrary job from the backlog and instead go back and look at it. And when I go and describe that job, you can see it was that security job that I ran earlier. And I still get a record of everything that happened on a more permanent basis, whether or not it's remote or local, we get that information permanently. So there you go. There is a quick run through of some of the improvements to people's workloads that you can get from using Bacalhau. It does not require replacing any of your central workloads or orchestration systems. You can begin just by using this at the edge and still get a number of different benefits here by reducing the amount of data you move, by using things like Python or whatever language you'd like to sanitize, aggregate, anonymize, whatever you like to your data before you get it to a central location. But at the end of the day, really staying out of the way of your devs, your data scientists, your data engineers, and letting them use the tools they already know and love extremely well. Thank you so much, and please let us know if you have any questions.